Hey, what's up, guys? We're going to take a look at Chapter 2, the planting of the English in America, right? So again, the big focus with the last chapter was taking a look at just exploration, what things were like in the Americas, a little bit of Africa, and then, of course, taking a look at the Europeans coming. And so this is what we're going to take a look at specifically in terms of the English. So a couple things, right? With England, right, is that a lot of North America, so even though the Spanish and the Portuguese were involved in the Americas, a lot of North America still remained unclaimed. Spain's northernmost claim was Santa Fe, New Mexico, right? So again, 16th century England, there was a lot of internal conflict, right? This is one of the big reasons why it took them a while to begin to participate in some of the things that were happening, right? So Spain unifies, right, with the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella. It's going to take England essentially almost 100 years to be able to do the same, and then we'll take a look at France eventually with a similar situation. One of the more important things that ends up happening, right, is the Martin Luther Protestant Reformation. And in terms of English history, right, the Protestant Reformation is going to play a major role, right, because King Henry VIII will break with the Catholic Church in 1534. And it led to the creation of the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, which again is a Protestant church. So again, the Anglican Church, right, is a Protestant church. I want to make sure that you guys understand that when I say that, right, it's the same thing. So again, Protestant church, okay, Anglican church, right? Henry's daughter, Elizabeth, she intensified the English rivalry with Spain. For a couple of reasons. Number one, she will make Protestantism the official religion of England. And another reason why is because her cousin Philip, he was essentially pulling a lot of the silver, the gold from the Americas. And he suspected that Elizabeth was actually paying a lot of the pirates to essentially raid, right, or maraud on the Atlantic to try to take all that stuff. One of the things that also is really important too is the Irish uprising, and one of the things that we'll see under Elizabeth is that the poor Irish, right, like they are living in Ireland, right, they're being wee Irish and, you know, taking care of their lucky charms, and you know, here come the English, right, like they force them to become Catholic. And then when the Protestant Reformation happens and England changes their mind, they go, no, you have to be Protestant. And those of you that are not going to be Protestant, right, we're going to kill you. So we'll talk a little bit about those things in class. We'll listen to a song by a guy named Morrissey, who is the lead singer of the Smiths. So we'll talk about that in class. So again, King Henry VIII, right, of course, a lot of you know in terms of his wives. So Catherine of Aragon, right, she is the mother of Queen Mary, right, the Bloody Mary. Anne Boleyn, right, she is the mother of Elizabeth I, and then of course you get Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. It is said that the one that he was truly in love with was Jane Seymour, and she's the one that actually died. So again, Elizabeth I, 1533 to 1603, she's the second daughter, like I said, right, the other one being Mary Tudor. She is the Protestant daughter. She makes Protestantism the official religion in 1559. That is huge. She's known as the Virgin Queen, right, because she never married. Again, it's widely known that she was pushing a lot of the pirating in the Caribbean. People like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh. You know, there's all this sort of mystery whether or not she was having an affair with someone like Sir Walter Raleigh. And if I have not told you the story of Miss Harding, I think I told a lot of you over the writing workshops, right, the story of the Renaissance Fair. I might tell you guys in class again in case you don't remember. So Elizabeth I, she's also, because Philip was pissed at her, he decides we are going to remove this whore's daughter, as he called her, from the throne. Even though, again, they were related, he wants to remove from the throne, and so he builds this huge navy, huge armada to sink the English, or to destroy the English, and it gets sunk in 1588. This is huge, right, because England now possesses power over the Atlantic. So the victory also had some other consequences. It led to a strong English government, a very popular monarch in Elizabeth, religious unity, in quotation marks, because, again, unity being forced, and increased nationalism. I'm going to talk a little bit about this nationalism, okay, in class, and what that actually means. So on the eve of empire, why was England ready, right? So 16th century English population was mushrooming. So it was becoming overpopulated. One of the things that began to happen too is that the English began to sort of enclose their farmland, and one of the things that they started doing was enclosing it for grazing, for sheep, right? Because they were starting to produce textiles out of wool, and this is going to be part of what leads to the Industrial Revolution. The traditional laws of primogeniture meant that the younger sons needed to seek opportunity elsewhere, right? So again, they wanted to seek some sort of opportunity. And then they also perfected the joint stock company, right, which is the forerunner of today's corporations, so being able to pool your money together, and we'll talk about that in class too. So again, joint stock company, right, Virginia. So when Elizabeth died, the person who took over England, because she had not married, was King James of Scotland. And so he unified the Scottish and English crowns into one. That's why the official symbol, right, of the coat of arms of King James is the lion, the English lion, and the unicorn from Scotland. So 1606, he granted the Virginia Company permission. They received a royal charter to settle in the New World. It was not intended to be permanent. And one of the things that's really important, right, is this. The charter guaranteed the rights of Englishmen, the idea that the English crown protects you, that you are still Englishmen even if you are not in England. This is going to play a really huge role, right, because as time goes by, these English living in England, especially in a place like Virginia where they had this charter, are going to say, well, wait a minute, if we're English and we're to be treated like English, shouldn't we receive the same sort of treatment or representation in Parliament? So May 24th, 1607, 104 men and boys founded Jamestown, named after King James, Virginia, and it's named after Queen Elizabeth, the area, because they had sort of explored that area before. It becomes the first permanent English colony, which is really important. So again, here is a just an artist representation, and I'll show you some pictures in class if I have time. I'm also going to show you a little scene, I think I told you guys in the other notes, right, that from the New World. They came on 3 ships, very similar to Columbus, right, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. This is actually the Susan Constant right here. And I believe this is the Discovery, and they don't actually have a replica of the Godspeed, is what I believe it was that they told us. But this is actually in the Chesapeake Bay. These are replicas. 40 colonists perished on the voyage itself. They had picked a terrible place. It was very swampy. The men wasted time looking for gold. Many of them were not farmers. They were not hardworking men. Again, many of them laws of primogeniture men. And thousands of mosquitoes, right, because they had reached this swampland, so not very hospitable. So one of the people that played a huge role was Captain John Smith. This is the book I was telling you guys about. It is a book called Love and Hate in Jamestown. It is the most accurate historical depiction of what happened at Jamestown. He took over the colony, and he had this sort of interesting relationship with Pocahontas. He's about 36 years old. She's about maybe 12, 13 years old. And so they had this sort of interesting relationship, right? Her father, Chief Powhatan, and they're all going to have sort of this triangle relationship that's going to help Jamestown survive. One of the more important times, right, was the starving time of 1609 to 1610, when they almost, right, the entire colony almost perished. But 1610, relief ship arrived, headed by a guy by the name of Lord Delaware, who eventually, Delaware, and of course, one of the things that we'll talk about with him is his relationship with Pocahontas, too. We'll talk about that in class. Not that type of relationship, but what he did. So by 1625, 8,000 settlers had come, but only 1,200 had survived, but that's still a lot. There was a continued distrust between the Powhatan people and the English. There was a series of 2 wars. The first Anglo-Powhatan War was between 1610 and 1614. This is going to be truly important, right, because it was actually ended with the marriage between Pocahontas and another person who had come, and this person is going to become really important, not just because he married Pocahontas, but a guy by the name of John Rolfe. The Second War, 1622 to 1632, results in the death of John Rolfe. Eventually there is a Third War, which between 1644 to 1646 resulted in the English control of the Chesapeake. So they came looking for gold, and instead they found brown gold. 1614, John Rolfe introduced sweet tobacco from the Bahamas. Tobacco became a cash crop, created greed for land, and also exhausted the soil. Jamestown also was a paradox of representative government. Why? Because in the same year that representative government is born in Williamsburg, in Virginia, the first slaves are brought. So 1619, representative government born, the House of Burgesses. You see a picture of it here. It was a mini parliament. There was self-rule. It was run by the first families of Virginia, which essentially was the wealthiest Virginians. And like I said, in 1619, 19 African slaves arrived at Jamestown. They were more like indentured servants, right? But again, in the same year that representative democracy is sort of started in Virginia, you get these African slaves. One of the things also, right, the second of the plantation colonies was Maryland. It was founded in 1634 by Lord Baltimore, right? It is the second plantation one, but is the fourth overall. Founded as a safe haven for Catholics, right? So Lord Baltimore was very loyal to the king, and as a result of that loyalty, right, he was granted this. Many poor Protestants began to outnumber the Catholics because they were inviting to everybody. And so in 1649, the second Lord Baltimore, the son, actually convinced the government in Maryland to pass a Toleration Act to ensure religious toleration to all Christians, but interestingly enough, death penalty to all Jews and all who did not believe in the divinity of Jesus. So you can see here Maryland, right? The West Indies, the British began to colonize the West Indies. By the middle of the 17th century, the UK had claimed, Jamaica, 1655, other sugar plantations like the Spanish. They tried to use natives, but 90% of them had died. Jamaica in 1776 was actually more profitable than the 13 English colonies, which I think is rather interesting. The African slaves, right, in the West Indies or the Caribbean, one of the places where they had these African slaves was Barbados. And so they had created slave codes or legal statuses of slaves and rights of masters, right? So you begin to see the prejudice and racism creep in. So again, the West Indies, you can see, some of the different, you can see that there's a lot of different islands, right? So you can see, Cuba, you can see Haiti, Dominican Republic, right? Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, right? Puerto Rico, Dominica, right? Antigua and Barbuda, the Virgin Islands, right? And you can see here, right? Barbados, which we were talking about. Now, something interesting is going to take place, right? Between 1642 and 1651, and it's the English Civil War. So the Magna Carta plays a big role, right, in 1215. And what happened was King Charles I, he essentially was trying to control a lot of things, and Parliament was trying to give, to make a long story short, Parliament was trying to give him instructions on things, and he was like, you know what, no, I'm just going to dismiss you. So he dismisses them. And as a result of that, we get this English Civil War, which Charles is removed and executed. He is beheaded. And so his son, Charles II, is actually exiled. And so one of the things that will happen is a Commonwealth of England will exist. And it will be headed by a man by the name of Oliver Cromwell. And we'll talk a little bit about Cromwell in class. So there was a conflict over, again, right, parliamentary power versus the monarchy. And again, so the constitutional monarchy of the Magna Carta. So you can see here, right, okay, Charles and then Oliver Cromwell. So one of the things that ends up happening is from between 1607 and 1660, right, from the time that the colonies were first created with Jamestown to 1660, there is a period of what is called benign neglect. The monarchs paid little to no attention to the colonies. So there was a lot of self-rule that developed, and we'll talk about this in terms of a mother or father and a child relationship. However, in 1660, the son of Charles I was restored to the throne. This begins what is known as the Restoration period, and also a period of salutary neglect. So we'll think of it more of as a period where they pretended not to care. Okay, and we'll talk more about that too. Then one of the things that happened, right, is that during this time, the Civil War had interrupted colonization. So in 1670, Carolina was created due to the lack of economic opportunity in the West Indies. Basically what happened was Carolina, it was started by men who had not been able to prosper in the Caribbean, and they got permission, and they named the area Charles, right, or Carolina. And so the port of Charleston, right, or Charlestown. So the colonists came, and they brought the Barbados slave codes to Carolina. And so here, right, in 1619, the first slaves were brought, but as a result of the Barbados slave codes, we begin to see these laws of racial superiority. Rice emerged as the primary principal crop. African slaves had resistance to malaria, so they were able to grow these crops. So again, you can see, right, the Carolinas and where they're located. So North Carolina was eventually formed. It was essentially very much similar to like Rhode Island. It was the unwanted from Carolina and Virginia began to settle in between, and these people are known as squatters because they didn't have permission. North Carolinians developed strong resistance to authority, so very anti-aristocratic. And so in 1712, North and South Carolina were officially separated into two different colonies. Georgia was intended to be a buffer between Spanish Florida and the English colonies, right? We talked a little about that too. It was founded in 1733 by a philanthropist, someone who loved humans, a guy by the name of James Oglethorpe. He wanted a place to be able to deal with things like prison reform for debtors. And he named it after King George II. So in terms of the plantation colonies, right, slavery became apparent in all five eventually. Growth of cities was difficult, although obviously they did have cities, but it was difficult because of the distance. The establishment of schools and churches was difficult. Many cash crops, tobacco, rice, indigo, and some religious toleration in all five, right? But so a lot of you, what ended up happening in your essays, right, is you said something like, maybe religion wasn't as important, but it was important to certain people. But again, and not in the same way, right, or to the same extent as maybe in the northern colonies. And again, you can see this is an example. This is actually Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's plantation. But you can just kind of see the extent of how big these plantations were. So again, we'll take a look at chapter 3 also and continue looking at the English.